Hello, everybody, and welcome to another live developer Q&A. My name is Josh Allen, aka Community Manager Lore. Joining me here today, Craig Amai.
Hi, good to be with you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Just real quick before we start, I believe your title is technically lead quest designer at the moment, but this time around in Legion, you've obviously been very focused on artifacts, order halls, and sort of that side of the game instead, right?
I've been a quest designer most of my time on the WoW team, and I led up the level up questing for Legion. But I'm sorry for Worlds of Draenor. But in Legion, I've been focused pretty much entirely on artifacts and order halls, and the quest designers have been carrying on the torch of the rest of the zone separately.
Nice. So we got tons of questions to get into here today. Words are difficult. It's not a great way to start off the stream. I'm going to be doing a lot of talking today. Let's go ahead and get right into this first question, though. This one comes from Zulamesh, who asked, will the class order hall change as new patches arrive? The shipyard was added to the garrison, so will anything be added to the class order hall similar to how the shipyard was added?
Yeah, absolutely. So we intentionally designed there to be a certain number of legs on both the artifact system and on the class order halls. So they're going to be relevant for a few months, regardless of the new content that we're adding along the way. Thank you. But when we reach the patch time frame, we definitely have some additional quest lines we're planning on rolling out out of the class order halls, and we're going to kind of keep an eye on what the community is kind of needing as we hit those patch time frames. As Ian talked about a little bit earlier, we're really interested in making sure that we actually deliver strong patches that react to what the game needs as time goes on. So we're keeping open ears for that kind of thing.
Awesome. Let's move on then. Next question comes from Moshi, I believe is how you pronounce this, who asked, will there be more artifact appearances in later content patches, or at least color variations?
Yeah, so amusingly enough, I think most of the community actually got a little bit of a sneak peek on this one unknowingly. So when Legion releases throughout the course of those first few months, there's a base artifact appearance you can get your hands on. There's an upgraded one that you get through your class hall campaign. There's a PvE oriented one that you get through kind of a legendary style quest line. PvP one through the honor system, and then the ones that we've been calling hidden appearances, some of which are a little less hidden than others. Those are all all those models, along with their color variants, are going out during the initial shipping of Legion. But there's one more model along with its color variants that people have probably been seeing on like Wowhead and MMO Champion and whatnot. That's actually intended for one of our later patches as part of what we've been referring to as like our challenge lines.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that sort of ties into the last question as well, talking about like finding, like basically setting up the system so that as the expansion continues, there's lots of different ways to hook new stuff into it, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Moving on. Next question comes from Rokin, I believe, who says, what's being done to allow artifact appearances to remain an option after Legion is over? As a druid, going back to old form models will be terrible. Obviously, there's been a lot of hype around the new, like the artifact specific cat form and bear form and so on. So
yeah, there are definitely some appearances I do not want to leave behind going forward. I mean, especially the druid ones. It's been a long time being able to finally be able to customize those forms is really satisfying.
Nice.
So we do have some intentions here. The thought right now is that people unlock all these various models and colors over the course of Legion, and then when we move on to the next expansion, we want to create a method of letting you take those appearances along that you have unlocked during the course of this expansion. So we're thinking we might do something where after Legion ends, we'll kind of cut that off. And so it'll be a special thing for people who obtained these along the way while all the content was still challenging and relevant.
So kind of similar to like the Miss Pandaria, the cloak, there was a certain point you couldn't, and obviously like now the legendary ring in Warlords of Draenor, there's a point where you can't get it anymore. You're thinking like you can keep these appearances past this certain point, but only if you've unlocked them already.
Yeah, that's the thought, and likely for a lot of the weapons that would probably be through the transmog system. For the forms, there isn't really a strong mechanism for that yet, but we're looking towards that. But again, that is a ways away, so we may kind of adapt that plan over time.
Yeah, like you said, just sort of trying to make sure that with the patch structure throughout the expansion, we're sort of responding to how the player base is reacting to things, what the needs are, and so on. That makes a lot of sense. Cool. Moving on. Next question from Zachary93 on Twitter, who asked, will there be a way to respec your artifact tree at will or at all to optimize as you need until full unlock is reached?
Yeah, so we did add a respec mechanism for artifacts that you can get at through one of the NPCs standing near your artifact forge. It's a little expensive though. We didn't really want artifact respecking to end up to turn artifacts into something where you feel like you need to customize them between every boss encounter or when switching back and forth between different types of content.
Yeah.
So the cost associated with respecking is probably going to hold people back from doing it much. It comes from the same power you would use to continue to unlock new traits.
Right. Yeah. It's like you respec, but you don't get all of the artifact power back or something like that.
Along those lines, yeah. It costs a similar amount to if you would purchase the next trait along the way. So I don't expect to see a lot of people doing respecking. The thing that we think alleviates some of the tension on that is that ultimately there's kind of a finite amount of time where you're going to go through unlocking these traits, and eventually you're going to unlock all of them.
Right.
So even if you have some choices along the way that you're not really sure you would have made if you had known what you know now, it's only going to be some amount of time before you have it all anyway.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And obviously, I think it's probably worth mentioning here, just for everybody who's watching this. Obviously, there's going to be some questions in here that if you've been playing the beta religiously, you might already kind of know the answer to.
Yeah.
But obviously, there's lots of people that are not playing the beta, so we want to make sure all the info gets out to everybody. Let's move on. This is a fairly large question here. It comes from Trivia Cow, who asked, can we get a formal explanation of how artifact knowledge works and will work over time, especially the need to grind the order hall resources regardless of when in the expansion you do the work orders? So we've talked a little bit in the past about how artifact knowledge, as time goes on, it becomes a little bit more lucrative, I believe, to actually do those things. Or there was some sort of mechanic. I actually don't remember it off the top of my head right now. It speeds up.
I go through. I mean, actually, I think this is a good example of something where if you haven't been playing with it on beta, there's a good chance you don't really know how this whole system works. So probably I should step through the basics. This one might be a little long-winded, so I apologize in advance.
No, go for it.
So essentially the way artifact power and artifact knowledge work, when you start the expansion, you get your weapon. All the content that you go out participating in throughout Legion is going to bring in artifact power, and you use that to unlock new traits in your weapon. Every trait you purchase costs a little bit more than the last one. During the level up experience, for the first, say, like 12 traits in your artifacts, it's only going to increase by a little bit for each trait. But going into the max level experience, the cost starts increasing a lot more. Around that same period of time, you start being able to pull in artifact knowledge through your class hall. And that increases the rate at which you gain artifact power out in the world. Cool. So that helps you keep up with the increasing costs. So that system exists for a number of reasons, but one of the big ones is it lets us kind of bring in the gap between different types of players a little bit. I mean, if you can have players very interested in doing endgame content and raiding and doing challenge modes or high-end PvP, some of which play for 60 hours and some of which play for 4.
Right.
And if we just had a fairly kind of normal linear curve to it, what we'd be seeing is people finishing their artifacts in a couple weeks while others take months or a year.
Right. Yeah.
So this system is kind of meant to bring that in. There's still absolutely going to be a difference between those types of players, right? But that difference isn't going to be so much that you can't even bring that player that plays 4 hours a week, you know?
Right.
So getting artifact knowledge, which kind of taps into the point of this question, you reach max level, you've got some researchers in your order hall, you bring them some order resources, and you say, hey, research my artifact weapons for me. They come back after a few days, and they give you a tome, like a scroll that lets you unlock a new point of artifact knowledge. So the cost on the sending off that research has kind of fluctuated a lot over the course of beta. Early in beta, it was like 300 order resources. It was fairly negligible. For most of beta, it's been 1,500 order resources, which it takes more effort to bring in. I think it's maybe a reasonable amount towards the beginning of the expansion when you're playing a lot, but I mean, we all kind of like taper off at some point and reach some equilibrium, right?
Yeah, or you start playing alts or something like that as well. Yeah,
absolutely. So the 1,500 probably over time would have reached a point where that could start feeling more like a chore, and we don't want that. Relatively recently, we actually brought that 1,500 cost back down to 500, which should keep it kind of in the realm of what we're aiming at. We want it to be something that encourages you to go out and do content a little bit, but
Yeah.
we don't want it to become a big burden over the course of the expansion.
Yeah, that 500 is like a couple of world quests or something like that, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you can go specifically for the lucrative world quests, knock that out with just a couple of them, or participate in whatever kind of content you want. It's not gonna, it shouldn't take a significant amount of effort.
Cool.
I think this question's also kind of alluding to the over the course of the entire expansion, like, will I always have this burden? So artifact knowledge goes up to 25 right now. There is a point at which you finish gathering all of your artifact knowledge. We might increase that a little bit in the patches, but I don't think this is going to be something they're going to be doing over the course of the entirety of the expansion.
Okay, cool. So I guess just kind of unpacking that a little bit, because like you said, there's a lot to digest there.
Yeah.
So we have your artifact power, which is the actual like raw almost currency that you put directly towards unlocking the traits in your artifacts. Then there's this artifact knowledge, which increases the rate at which you gain artifact power, increases how much artifact power you actually get for things.
Yeah.
So as time goes on and you unlock more artifact knowledge, you start to earn that artifact power faster.
Yeah.
So that way, if you want to play, and the artifact knowledge is for your entire class, right? It's not tied to a specific spec.
Yeah, it's for your character. You learn about all your weapons at
Yeah.
once, so it does.
So that way, if you want to switch to another character, in fact, actually, if I remember correctly, we may have the next. Yes, in fact, this is a great follow-up question for that. Comes from Ravens, who asked, "How will the artifact catch-up mechanics work in Legion for alts or alt specs?" So obviously, we were just talking about artifact knowledge and how that works. So can you explain a little bit how that ties into alt specifically?
Yeah, definitely. So alt specs, just based off what we were talking about right there. Because you are learning about all your weapons at once, say you were a fire mage and you had progressed a long ways on your fire artifact, and then you decided, I want to start getting into frost. I think that'll be good for PvP. So you go get your frost artifact and you start trying to unlock traits in that. Because you already have a number of artifact knowledge, you're going to earn power much more rapidly, and those first traits through frost will go really fast.
Nice.
So the way alt specs kind of play out through this system is, if you want to maintain multiple specs at a high level of progress, like kind of at the peak of the curve that we expect, that will take about twice as much effort. It'll be very similar to as if you were playing a hybrid class in previous expansions and trying to keep up with gear, right? Like a tank and DPS and doing both at the same time. So that's kind of the way the alt spec experience will work. For alt characters, there's kind of one more aspect to the system we haven't talked about, and that's the speed of the work orders, the speed of getting the research back. So initially, when you send out one of that research, it would take typically 5 days for you to get it back and unlock that point of knowledge. But you can have a couple of them that you queue up and keep rolling. We actually keep track of how many days it's been since the expansion launched, and where we expect you to be in terms if you had been doing research the entire time.
Okay.
And for anyone who's kind of behind that, we make those that research go a little bit faster.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So you potentially see that research coming in 4 days or 3 days, or if you're really far behind, and only a day per point. So what that does is help us. Bring up alts and people who come to the expansion later, and kind of bring them up to where everyone else is at, kind of gradually, by increasing the speed at which they get that knowledge.
Nice. So, like, say I'm playing a warlock from launch, and I'm playing my warlock. I'm really into my warlock. I've geared up my demonology artifact. I've geared up my destruction artifact.
Yeah.
But then 6 months in, I say, you know what? I really kind of want to play a paladin now.
Yeah.
I'll be able to come in, get my obviously level up my paladin and everything, but also my artifact knowledge. I'll be able to put in those work orders much more regularly.
The first ones will come back really fast,
Nice.
and because of that increased power, you'll rocket through those first traits really fast, and
Nice.
you'll kind of catch up to that 70% point or whatnot pretty quickly, and then start kind of working towards the rest.
Okay. Cool. It is a bit of a complicated system overall, I think, but I kind of suspect this is one that once you're actually in there, like playing with it and actually doing it, a lot of the behind the scenes stuff will just sort of sort out, and it'll just basically mean you can do it the second time faster, third time faster.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, it's accounting for a lot of things, so it can sound like there's a lot going on, but in reality, like from the perspective of playing it in game, it's basically like send off your research when you can, go out and play content and unlock traits, and it just kind of it handles itself.
Nice. Here's a follow-up question on artifact knowledge from Solitha on Twitter, who asked, will artifact knowledge be additive account-wide, meaning all alts learning it add to the total benefit? It sounds like from what we were just talking about that's not the case, but is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, for one character, you're learning it for all weapons at the same time,
right.
But it's a bit dangerous to try and let multiple characters research at the same time, because then it kind of becomes smart to queue it up across multiple characters at once. So you don't unlock it cumulatively across your account.
Yeah, I think when we had, I want to say it was both when Ian was on here for a Q&A as well as Paul Cubitt, I think, was talking about it a bit too, where obviously we're trying very much to avoid situations we've had like with the farm in Mista Pandaria and to some extent with the garrison in Warlords of Draenor as well, where it felt like you kind of needed to have 4 or 5 of these going at once so that you could be contributing. And you don't necessarily, like, it's fine if you want to have 4 or 5 of them going at once, but you shouldn't feel like, I only want to play my paladin, I need to level 4 alts so that my paladin can get stronger faster.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I mean, I think if you look through all of the things we're doing for different classes this expansion that bring the classes apart and give them unique things they can experience, I think there's a ton of reason this expansion that you're going to want to play alts just because you experience a completely different version of the world.
Right.
And I'm excited about the alt experience. We just don't want to motivate people towards alts because mechanically it's better, you know?
Right. Yeah. You should play an alt because it's fun to play an alt, not because you feel like you have to play your main effectively.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So here's a straightforward question from Karate Chops, who's been very lucky with the question submissions so far.
I've seen his name. I have.
Yeah. But Karate Chops asked, how long will it take on average to max out your first artifact?
So we're expecting, based off of how we've paced out that knowledge, which kind of controls just how far you can get reasonably, we're expecting that to take a few months to kind of get every trait in your artifact. That's obviously going to vary kind of wildly based off what type of player you are. Well, maybe not wildly. It will vary a bit based off what type of player you are. I think that, like we said, that your first artifact will go that way, but the second ones may go dramatically faster based off the knowledge catch up.
Well, and also, like, if you're the player who's really staying on top of your artifact, you're making sure you get in those the artifact knowledge work orders all the time. I guess work order is the wrong term for it, but I guess just kind of comparing it to a system that people already know. And you're going out, you're doing all those world quests to get as much artifact power as possible. You're going to be on the top of that curve, like we were talking about before.
Yeah.
But if you're someone who you play a little bit more casually, maybe only a few hours a week or something like that, you're not really able to keep up with those work orders as much. You'll be able to put them in faster. So if you do decide to come in, my artifact, I'm a bit behind on my artifact, I want to catch back up, you'll have that opportunity to help out with that.
Yeah.
As well.
You won't actually be that far behind. Yeah.
And that keeps it from, like you said, keeps it from the gap between the different styles of players being too large. There will be a difference, obviously, but
I guess one thing we should clarify here really fast. When we say max out your artifact, we're essentially talking about unlocking every one of those main traits you see in the tree. Yeah. There is actually an additional trait that opens up after you unlock all of those that lets you continue to put artifact power into your weapon and gain small increases in power over time. It's kind of somewhat similar to the Paragon system, minus the choosing out of different things.
Okay, cool. Let's move on then. Next question comes from Ningjing. Ningjing, I'm actually not sure how to pronounce this, who said, why is there a massive balance difference between how you obtain certain hidden artifact skins? So obviously there's a little bit of, like, they're hidden because they're supposed to be hidden.
There's a few parts of the artifact system where it was actually pretty important to us that we not try and make everything equitable. We want the weapons to feel different. We want classes to feel different. We want you to have unique experiences based off what you're playing with, because that's part of what makes jumping to a different class and experiencing the expansion a different way so interesting, right? So hidden appearances are one of the key places where we did that quite a bit. Like there's a huge variance. I mean, right now people are saying that, like, well, some of them require that you get to Exalted with certain factions. Those ones are are much harder, and I don't. There are some they haven't seen yet that are even harder than that.
Excellent. Some of them are still hidden.
Yes, some
Good
of
news.
them. Yeah, the Ret Paladin and Arcane Mage will be fun ones when people uncover them.
Ooh.
But I think this is probably alluding also a little bit to the fact that we have a few specific what we're calling hidden appearances that are a lot easier to get at. There's one that's honored at one of the factions, and there's one that's basically a high gold cost off a vendor. There are a few specific hidden appearances where we identified kind of like if you for people who play hunters, there are people who just they identify themselves as bow hunters or gun hunters, and they will not have the other, right? Like, and I'm kind of the same way, honestly. And so for some of those specific specs, we wanted to create the opportunity for people to be able to get the alternative version of their weapon at a fairly early point, so they could get back to being a bow hunter like they wanted to be.
Right.
So a lot of those ones that are more accessible are specifically trying to get at some of those weak points and let people customize the way they want to customize.
Cool. And so that, like you say, explains why some of them are a lot quote unquote easier to get depending on how you play the game. Obviously, like a gold cost can be harder for some people than a long grind. But.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on. Question here from Valenoth, who asked, given that artifacts quote unquote complete many specs, what are you doing to make sure 1 through 109 are smooth, balanced, and rewarding?
Yeah. So when you say complete many specs, I think a little bit of what's kind of being suggested here is that reaching those gold medal powers in the artifacts is doing something like really potent or transformative to class that they're finding to play a big role in how they play, right? I think that's so the way we approached balance for the classes along with the artifacts is we looked at all the classes, we balanced them against each other separately. We wanted to make sure that, like when you do the Legion pre-patch and whatnot, that everything is going to be similarly viable. And then we did a whole second balance pass when you finish all of your artifacts.
Oh, okay.
We're looking towards a world where we want classes to feel complete from the beginning, be interesting the whole way through level up, and feel complete on the end there. And I mean, I think honestly, any world in which we actually hit our goal of trying to make those gold metal powers feel like I really want that's going to do awesome things for me, is going to be a world where there's a risk of it feeling looking from a distance like this. Like that's necessary to complete the spec, but we made all those specs to be feel really good even without the artifacts.
Yeah, and like you can compare it to earlier on in the leveling process as well. Like if you're a Windwalker monk who doesn't have Rising Sun kick yet, like you definitely feel like there's something missing from the spec in that regard, but it's because you're low level and you just haven't gotten there yet. And as you level up, you get more and more abilities in the earlier leveling game. So to me, it's kind of similar in the leveling game for like it's just like in a lot of previous expansions where you actually unlock entirely new abilities as you level up.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the similar thing for the artifacts.
Yeah, it's a bit like that, but I think with specifically the goal of when I play that class without my artifact and I do Legion raiding while I'm waiting for Legion to come out during pre-patch or whatnot.
Warlords raiding while you're waiting.
I'm sorry, Warlords raiding. I did that twice now. I still feel like I have a complete rotation, like I have all the tools in my toolkit that I need. Artifacts aren't trying to fill any holes that the class needs. They're trying to add on extra awesome stuff.
Okay, cool. That's a really good way of explaining it. Thank you very much. Okay, next question from Deadly Kitten 5 on Twitter, who asked, how will artifact appearances obtained from completing achievements such as raids, dungeons, and archaeology work? Per toon, account wide? How is that going to work?
So essentially the same way as the achievements. The majority of the achievements that we've associated with unlocking colors for artifacts are still character specific.
Okay.
There are a few specific ones that are account achievements, and for those cases, those will unlock those extra colors across other characters as well.
Okay, cool.
But for any of the color unlocks on artifacts, you always have to obtain that new model first, like the upgraded model or the PvP model or whatnot, before you can obtain the extra colors for it. So even if you've done that achievement, it won't be like a shortcut to getting that new model.
Okay, and then the different appearances normally come from like quest chains or prestige system or
the first major prestige, and then pretty much all of the others are quest chains.
Excellent. All right. Moving on. This calls back a little bit to what we were talking about just a minute ago. A question from Blissful Draenei, who asked, "Are artifacts a way you plan on tuning classes mid-expansion? Are they another route to nerf, buff, or tweak class issues or concerns?" So I guess kind of, I think obviously in the case where an artifact trait, if we go, whoa, hang on, this artifact trait ends up being way overpowered or something, like obviously we would tune that. But are we looking at this as, okay, let's say rogues are overpowered. We need to tune rogues, like outlaw rogue or something.
Yeah.
Are we going to look at the artifact and say, all right, well, we'll just tone back their artifact and that'll solve the problem?
Potentially. I mean, we definitely didn't add the artifacts explicitly as one of those tuning mechanisms,
Right.
but once you unlock the artifact, it's basically all the things it's offering you can be very significant parts of your rotation, your class, your damage output. So ultimately, all the artifact traits will be tuning points in the same sense that any of the class abilities are along the way. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And that kind of maybe worth sort of just explaining a little bit sort of the process we tend to use for tuning. We don't tend to look and say, the example I just gave, we don't tend to go, oh, rogues are overpowered, let's pull down their numbers. We tend to go, okay, outlaw rogues are doing really well in this kind of boss fight, and we think they might be too strong in this kind of boss fight. Mm-hmm. And then we go and say, okay, so why are they too strong in that kind of boss fight? Well, it's because there's not as much, just for sake of argument, there's not as much motion on this boss fight, so we need to, their raw damage when they don't have to move is too high. Why is their raw damage too high? Okay, this ability is doing too much damage, we need to tone back that ability. And there's this whole process of narrowing it down to the individual thing that's actually causing the issue.
Yeah.
So I would say in the case of an artifact, maybe we narrow it down and say, oh, it's because this artifact trait is buffing this ability by 50% for sake of discussion.
Yeah.
Maybe that should be 40% instead or something like that. And in those cases, we'd probably change the artifact.
I think it's entirely possible. Obviously, we don't want to do huge tuning swings
Sure.
once we go live, but it is a place where we can potentially do them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Next question comes from Ashlina, who asked, is there overlap between individual artifact quest lines? If I level all classes to 110, how much repetitive gameplay can I expect with each artifact acquisition? So I think just sort of, I guess, to read in this question a little bit, there are, obviously, for each spec, there's an individual quest line to unlock the artifact. And every once in a while, those quest lines kind of, there's a little bit of overlap there that we've seen through the beta.
Yeah.
But how much overlap is there? Do you think? And is there going to be? Do you feel like that's something that could end up feeling repetitive if you're going through a whole bunch of different stuff?
I don't think it's going to be nearly as bad as some players might think. I mean, it depends what specs you've played, what assumptions you might make
Sure.
about where these acquisitions are going. So there are a few specific acquisitions that do tap into similar content. I think if you look at Dispriest and Arcane Mage, they play out very similarly. If you look at Balanced Druid, Unholy Decay, and Affliction Lock, they play out somewhat similarly. There are a few others that go to similar spaces but have very different content.
Right.
But all in all, out of the 36 specs, the majority of them are very unique experiences. So unless you are so unfortunate as to choose those 3 specs in a row that go to the same place, I think you'd actually be surprised how much unique content there is to experience that. I think it's definitely worth playing through different classes. Yeah, and that's not even mentioning like every class has its own unique order experience and how the order forms, which sometimes involves some custom content along the way. And yeah, I don't actually think you're going to see near that much repetition at all.
Yeah, so even in the case where maybe, like you say, you do end up playing a Balanced Druid and an Affliction Warlock, and you're like, okay, yeah, we kind of went through the same little area here. Then the Balanced Druid, or the Druid and Warlock Order Hall quest chains go off in different directions. So you end up seeing very different content anyway.
The Warlock Order Hall in particular has some big chunks of content on both ends of it that are very different. And even in doing those acquisitions, there's quite often little puzzles and challenges that we put in that play out really interestingly on different specs. Like the Karazhan Catacombs for Balanced Druid and Affliction Lock, there's a moment where you need to cross like a gap of like skeletal hands, like a big damaging area, and to do it you need to hit someone on the other side with like an interrupt or use a demon to enslave it, or like you have like a variety of different options for how you can deal with that challenge based off what spec you are.
Nice. That's really cool, and that's possibly something that I don't I don't think we've really gotten across too much, but it's worth mentioning here while people are listening, is that a lot of these class specific and spec specific quest chains do tie in directly to the abilities you have available. The couple of them that I've done, I've actually found to be similar in a lot of ways to in Mists of Pandaria. There was the Green Fire quest chain for warlocks, or way back in Classic. Like there were the mount quest for paladins, or the totem quest for shaman, where you had to do very specific things that tied in directly with the actual abilities that your class has, which I think is really cool because it makes me feel like, oh yeah, I can only do this because of the class that I'm playing, and if I was a rogue right now, I'd be screwed. There's no way I could get past this. Good thing I'm a warlock, sort of, sort of thing.
It's exactly the feel we wanted to go for,
Nice. All right, next question comes from Senshi, who said, how will the lore for each artifact be explained in-game, and how will the newly introduced artifacts be elevated to the level of status the established artifacts have? So I guess kind of, at least the second part of that question is talking about, like, there's Ashbringer, and then there's there's the stick that someone found somewhere for some other spec. Obviously, nothing is quite to that low of a level, but I can understand the sort of the sentiment coming from someone who's maybe less familiar with those. So how are we making sure that the lore for each of these is A, really cool, but B, also actually gets across to players?
So we identified really early on that like the thing that made artifacts really stand out, like one of the key elements that makes them different from any other weapon, is their history, right? Like the places they've been, the battles they've been involved in, the heroes that have wielded them, or the villains in some cases. And you know a lot of that history for Ashbringer or Doomhammer. Like a few of the ones we've chosen, they stand out because you recognize them, because you've seen those stories. So one of the things we did along the way with all the other artifacts is we wrote out like an awesome backstory to each of them. Where did they come from? What have they done? And we've put that in these special artifact tomes inside the class halls. So I didn't mention it as part of all the other knowledge stuff because there's so much going on with knowledge. But when you every now and then when you're bringing back that knowledge, your researcher will point you towards this tome and let you know that they've unlocked a new part to the backstory of your weapons.
Oh, cool.
So you can go kind of read through that backstory as it gradually unfolds in the tome in your book. So that's for the people who want to read into it, who really want to know about their weapons, that's there. Now, there's also going to be a certain number of players who don't really want to go read a book and WoW, like they're happy to play. And that's also part of the reason we made these unique acquisition lines for each of them. Some of those acquisition lines are kind of tapping into side stories, kind of tangents of the artifact stuff, but through those acquisition lines, we wanted to kind of really land the themes of the weapon, and for some weapons in particular really kind of touch on where they came from, so that even if you aren't the reading type, you still kind of absorb a little bit of what makes this weapon unique and powerful along the way.
Nice. I guess just to give some perspective on that from my own experience, I've been playing through the Paladin different artifact acquisition lines. And the Ashbringer one, I was like, yeah, this is cool. This is kind of what I expected for the Ashbringer. And then for the protection one, I thought the protection one was really cool as well. And it's interesting how, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's interesting how it sort of ties into what I've seen from some of the other classes quests as well. There's some interesting correlations there. But the one that really surprised me, I think, was actually the Silver Hand, the holy artifact. Where like at first I saw it, like I've played Paladin a lot over the years, never really been into Holy that much. I've played Holy like maybe twice, and every time I've gone Holy, it's because my guild has been desperate for a healer. They're like, oh god, what are we possibly going to do? So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll play the Holy artifact line as well, see what that's all about. And I was actually really like sort of, okay, actually this weird mace thing, this is actually really cool. There's actually, again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I thought the ending of it in particular, I was like, okay, this is exciting now.
Good.
So yeah, definitely make sure you give the lesser known artifacts a chance, because there's some really cool stuff going on with those.
So for the Holy, I mean, it's interesting to mention when you talk about that. There's a few of our acquisition lines that go into some of the same locations. The Tyr's Tomb is one of them, where they don't actually use the same content at all. They're laid out kind of linearly, so that one acquisition line kind of happened before another, and you can see the aftermath of the previous spec and what they did there as you go through and do yours. It's subtle, and it's only on a few of them, but it's if you're paying attention, there's kind of some interesting stuff to discover there.
Interesting. Now I'm gonna have to go through and try to find out what other ones tie into that area. Okay, cool. Next question. This is an excellent tie-in.
Well
from
timed.
Comes from Beefy the Paladin, who asked, "Holy Paladins have been using one-handers and shields offhands for a long time. Why the change to a big two-handed mace with a book?" So because it's really cool, I'll just go ahead and say. But yeah, like what actually prompted that decision?
Yeah, there's a few of the artifacts where we saw an opportunity to kind of harken back to the core original fantasy of where that spec came from, right? If you go play War 3 and you look at Uther and the other paladins we represent in there, they're carrying the big warhammer in the book. That's kind of the classic paladin look in some of those earlier Warcraft representations. And if you look at Murad in the cinematic, I think before Burning Crusade, is that when that was?
Yeah.
He's got that fucking like awesome scene of like the close the book, hammer over the shoulder, and it's a paladin fantasy we really wanted to hearken to. And I mean, there was also kind of a general goal for the artifacts to make this weapon feel unique versus all the other weapons that you've wielded it across your time in Azeroth. Like the mace and shield thing, it's been what Holy Paladins have been doing for a long time, but it's very passive. It sits on your hip and on your back, and you don't actually use it in combat. And we really wanted to see if we could both make paladins as a spec be involved a little bit more in melee, whip out that hammer and actually hit things with it every now and then. But then we also wanted to, like find that unique weapon that really lands that fantasy at the same time.
Nice. Yeah, and like I was just saying, like having played through it personally, I'm convinced at this point. So I guess to talk to Beefy the Paladin, I would say give it a chance. It's actually really cool.
Yeah. I think some people, I'm sure will miss the shields. It's a nice look. Yeah. But for those people, ultimately, there's the next expansion. This is a unique weapon for a certain time period.
Cool. Moving on. Next question comes from Scribe Pomura, who asked, "Will Tauren, Feral, and Guardian models have their horns? And can we opt to use the new cat model via glyph or another method?"
So when we decided on the artifacts for Feral and Guardian specifically, the fantasy we wanted to go for was you get the claws of Ursoc and you assume the avatar of Ursoc. You are a representation of Ursoc now, right? And similarly with Ashamain and the Feral stuff. So as that, it didn't really make sense to do the racial variations of those models for the horns and whatnot, because Ashamain didn't have horns. This is what Ashamain looked like.
Right.
So we're not intending to add like the Tauren horns to any of those current artifact models. As far as a method via glyph or something otherwise to allow you to go back to the kind of the newer cat and bear models that aren't those avatar forms, we've been hearing that feedback a little bit, and we think it's a really good idea. Where it's not going to be in the shipping game, but it's something we're seriously considering for the patches.
Okay, cool. So yeah, like obviously, as soon as you get the artifact, you're going to be in that other form for a lot of the time. Don't even really see the other one much. So it's really cool that we're looking into ways to bring that to people. Okay, next question. What's going to happen with artifacts during... Whoops, I should actually put it up here on the screen. There we go. What's going to happen with artifacts during Legion patches? Will we get more perks to spend artifact power on? That question, of course, from Shamlicious. So we talked a little bit about what's going to happen with order halls during Legion patches, but now talking about artifacts a bit.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning a little bit before, we intentionally put a bit more of a tail on this system than we might have seen with certain other systems in the past. Like, this is going to go on for a few months that you're unlocking these artifact traits, and then there's going to be the continuing power after that you're spending your artifact power on. So we have the system planned for it a little bit in that sense, but what we want to do with the system otherwise is really let it play out a bit and kind of see what players think of it, see what it feels like it's missing, see just put it out in the wild and let it grow. We have some intentions for patches, but we don't want to commit to too much on the system side until we see this bear fruit.
Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense to me. Let's see how it goes and then go from there rather than like planning the whole thing out from the get-go. Like, obviously there are like plans for options. I should say, instead of It's not like we just went, artifacts, I guess we'll figure it out from here. But
No, for sure. I mean, it's very much like we know that we planned a long way ahead with the garrison feature, right? And one of the lessons we've learned, as Ian has been saying, is that we want to make sure that we can actually react to what the community needs rather than making assumptions too far ahead.
Awesome. All right, question here from Zorixis from Twitter, who asked, why are the fist-type artifact weapons invisible when sheathed?
Yeah, so fist weapons have been invisible when sheathed throughout the entirety of WoW. I was a little frustrated with that, and I actually spent a lot of time trying to manipulate the fist weapons and find a comfortable way to sheathe them on the character. The big problem with fist weapons is that they don't have a point on the weapon commonly, where there's the shallow silhouette that you have on like a sword or a mace or an axe, like the haft portion.
Yeah.
So they're quite often really bulky. And all of the points we would look to for sheathing stuff like that end up resulting in these awkward bulges and lots of clipping, and it just looks bad. So as much as I did explore that for a while, it didn't really feel like a reasonable option to make them not be invisible while sheathed. But that being said, like, part of the reason we chose the fist weapons for the specs that we did, Windwalker Monk has fist weapons, and an elemental shaman has a fist weapon, is because for those specific specs, they acted as an opportunity for them to be very present in combat. So when an elemental shaman is casting spells, they have special sheathing rules that let their fist weapon be out during the spell cast.
Oh, cool.
And make it really present during the kind of what we consider to be the most notable part of play there, right? So while the fist weapons don't show while sheathed, we chose them because they will show under a lot of other like really important circumstances.
Nice. So you may not see it as much when you're just standing around, but when you're like actively playing and you're like killing the boss or attacking another player, that's when it'll come out.
They'll be very present.
It'll look cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And also no awkward bulges is always a good priority to have. All right, moving on. Next question from Scythepunk, who asked, why were most of the Order Hall teleports taken out of the classes that didn't already have something similar, such as Monk, Death Knight, or Druid? So obviously this person was paying attention very early on in Alpha and Beta, where there used to be like this ability, like you could, warriors had like leap to Valor Jar or whatever it's called. I don't remember the actual name off the top of my head, and so on. Why were those removed but sort of left in for like druids and do druids actually have one? I think druids just go to Moon.
Well, they had teleport Moonglade, but in the course of this expansion, it now teleports from the Dreamway, which gets them to Moonglade or many other places.
Oh, okay. But yeah, so looking at the question, what was the reasoning behind taking those out?
Yeah, so we had those in early because we expected there to be a need to go to your order halls frequently enough that we wanted to make sure that you had like a convenient method of getting there. But there were a couple things that played out over the course of seeing them on Alpha and Beta that really kind of changed our perspective on that. One of them is that like visiting the order halls really frequently, like every half an hour, anything that like it got to be way too much. Like you don't want to be teleporting back and forth between locations that often. You want to actually be out experiencing a story in the world and continuing it the whole way through, right? So ultimately, like the original convenience need that we thought we would want, we actually spread out the pacing. We didn't have that convenience need as time went on. But more to the point, it was really important to us that Dalaran be a critical central hub for the expansion. We want you to go to Dalaran and then go out to other places in the world, to go to Dalaran and do lots of key services. So in the process of removing the class hall teleports, we added the Dalaran Hearthstone and changed the portal network and everything to make it so that Dalaran would be the place you come to first, and then you go out to your order halls and do anything you need to do there, rather than having this strange multi-step process of like go to your order hall, then go to Dalaran, then go out to other places that you need to go.
Right. Yeah. So that way the I think we do have a question in here that's somewhere along this line, so I won't go into this too much, but it sort of makes sure that Dalaran is where you go, and then the way it actually works out in Beta, obviously there's portals to and from the Order Hall and Dalaran.
Yes.
For every class. So you kind of go to Dalaran, take the portal over to your class hall, do whatever it is you need to do in there. Then you can go right back to Dalaran, where like the bank and auction house and everything are.
Yeah, for sure. And then the classes that already had teleports, we didn't really want to take that away from them.
Out,
yeah, and it's nice having a little bit of that distinction of this is something that makes my class different than any other class.
Cool. Question here from Angensenius, I think is how that's pronounced, who said, "Will additional famous NPCs show up in the Order Hall during quests or patches? Especially the Warrior Order Hall is missing famous NPCs."
So for the most part, we've introduced the famous NPCs that we want to play out during through the Order Halls. We may be bringing in a couple during the patch time frame, but more likely we'll take the characters we've introduced and play out their stories and let you kind of see the end of all the tales we've started telling. Specifically the Warrior Order Hall is a little bit more of an interesting case for people who were there in really early alpha. You likely would have seen that we had the ghosts of many major warrior heroes there. Yeah. It was one of the fantasies we were originally considering for the Warrior Order Hall is like the Hall of Heroes, and this is where you see people who never would have been, from completely different points in history, all in one place. It's an awesome fantasy. We really love that fantasy. But the more we played it out, the more awkward it felt. Like it didn't feel appropriate for major orc heroes and major human heroes to end up in what is essentially like the Vrykul ascended, almost heaven type place, right?
Yeah.
It was a strange setting for them. A lot of them, like, you can't really imagine those people being side by side, and this orc would not stand by this human. It would not be okay. So over time, we kind of identified that we had a lot stronger neutral fantasy by focusing on that Vrykul fantasy specifically. It let us pull away a bit from those really uncomfortable faction ties that could never really be reconciled, and give warriors a new fantasy that they could take forward and experience. So I'm not really expecting that we'll be pulling in some of those major warrior NPCs into the Warrior Order Hall, but I'm sure they'll still have stories to play out in the future.
Awesome. All right, let's move on. Next question here comes from Casby, who asked, "What is the reason behind limiting the number of Order Hall champions you can have to 6?"
So for Order Hall champions, it was really important to us that you recognize them, that they be distinct, that they be like people that we didn't want you to forget them amidst a mass of a lot of followers. Right. So like to start, we limited the number of champions down to very notable people and and people you would recognize or learn to recognize. In terms of the kind of the 6 out of 8 cap, it's really just we want you to make some choices about who you care about, who you want to invest in and spend time with, because it makes them a little bit more compelling in the process.
Cool. All right, let's move on. Question comes from Scope, who asked, "Will there be a transmog NPC available in our class order halls, and can we redo talents while in them? And also, I believe that's supposed to be class order halls. I always want to read that as Circle of Healing. Do class order halls generate rested XP?" So we were kind of talking about this a minute ago, but things like transmog NPCs, like talents is a little bit different, but things like the bank or the auction house, none of that stuff is in the order halls, if I'm correct.
Yeah, and intentionally, yeah. Like I said before, we do want Dalaran to be a central hub of the expansion. The major cities in general, we left certain services in those locations so that they would still have a large purpose and they wouldn't turn into barren wastelands. So transmog NPCs, we don't have any intention of pulling into the class order halls. We want those to be one of those things that you go to the other locations for. There is rested experience in the class order halls, and by proxy, that means you can redo your talents in those locations.
Yeah, just to, I guess, explain that for anyone who's not quite familiar yet, the way that changing talents works is actually changing a little bit with the pre-expansion patch, as well as obviously the Legion expansion, where you can use a Tome of the Clear Mind, which grants you, or Tome of the Tranquil Mind, I believe it is in Legion, where it grants you the ability to change talents just freely for the next, I think it's a minute that it lasts at the moment. And then also when you're in a rested area, you can just change talents freely at any time. So that's why that part of that question was required a little bit of extra explanation. Yeah. But yeah, I think personally, making sure that all of those important things are in Dalaran will help to alleviate a lot of what ended up being an issue with the garrison, where like in my garrison, I have the auction house, I have the bank, I have void storage, I have a transmog, I have everything in there. So I Actually, I don't remember if I have a transmog guy in there or not. But regardless, I have pretty much everything in there.
And
so
zero other players.
Yeah, I very rarely need to actually leave my garrison and go over to War Spear or Storm Shield and actually do anything.
Yeah.
So I think that makes a lot of sense. It makes sure that Dalaran is sort of where everybody's hanging out, and that way you see other players. It feels more like a vibrant and alive world. And you'll see other people from your class in the Order Hall, but every time you're in the Order Hall, it's because you're there to do something. And then you can hang out if you want.
I'm sure people will hang out a little bit. We just definitely wanted some reasons for them to go back and forth.
Okay, cool. Makes sense to me. Question here from Tatiana, who asked, what was the reasoning behind allowing trade chat to be accessible from within class order halls? Aren't you worried that players will just sequester themselves inside their order halls instead of going out into the world? So again, this is really along the same lines of what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
But specifically looking at having trade chat be accessible from there. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was really just, we didn't want there to be like a nasty tension in between. Like, I don't want to go into my order hall yet. Like, I want to watch trade a little bit longer. It feels like a major social location in the same sense that the cities do. So it makes sense for trade chat to be in both locations, so you're not missing out when you're in one. And we aren't particularly worried about that being the breaking point that makes you hang out in the order halls all the time for exactly the reasons we were just saying. There's enough other things you're going to be coming back for.
Cool. Moving on, next question here from Darsh1982. You were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier, who asked, why was Marksman given a bow and Beast Mastery a gun? Marksman equals snipers, yeah?
Yeah, I think... I think if you were to go around asking all of your hunter friends what their opinion on what marksman means is, you'd end up with pretty strong opinions on both sides of the equation. At least that's been my experience in talking to people about exactly this issue. Some people they define themselves as the archer, particularly like there are a lot of people who play Night Elves who see that fantasy as their fantasy, whereas a lot of people who play goblins or now gnomes like guns may be the only thing that makes sense at that point, right? This is one of those things that it's really divisive. People feel very, very strongly on both sides of the equation, which is exactly why when we identified one that we wanted to associate with the spec, we tried to put some options in for the other.
Through the artifact appearances.
Through the artifact appearances, but also through allowing people to transmog if they feel really strongly about it.
Cool. Yeah, I know I was a gun hunter for a long time. I always used a gun, mostly because the gun sound before Warlords of Draenor, I knew it really bothered a couple of people that I was playing with. So I was like, That's the reason. I have to constantly use it, so they have the pow pow going off all the time. But then I went and I got a couple of bows that I really like, so I've been using those instead.
Yeah.
All right. Question here from Wervada on Twitter, who asked, in the case that you make a bigger change to an artifact trait, will you allow players to respec the artifact power for free? So we were talking a little bit earlier about like examples of cases in which we might want to make a balance change to an artifact trait. So if that were to happen, do you think that's something that we would want to do, to just do like an instant respec for that or something?
We'd like to avoid it at all costs.
Right.
I mean, basically, we don't want to be tweaking traits or class abilities so strongly that something like that would be necessitated if we can avoid it. I mean, if we reach that point where we absolutely have to do that, then I guess maybe we'll need to talk about this. But we'd really prefer not to make those big changes, not to force respecs on players. And to a degree, we're also, as I spoke about a little bit before, there's some pressure alleviated by the fact that you will have all these traits at some point. So we've been spending a lot of time on beta, a lot of time testing these things internally, trying to make sure we land the balance in a good place right now. So I'd be very surprised if like we got hit during the early points of the cycle with, oh, we totally didn't see that coming. And towards the later points of the cycle, we'll be in an almost complete state. So hopefully this will not be necessary.
Okay, cool. All right. Next question here comes from... I don't think I can pronounce this.
Thasmanajagag?
From Thasmanajagag.
I'm sorry I butchered your name.
Yeah, I give up on that one. Congratulations on
Thasman.
Thasman. There we go. Will artifact power progression, similar to item level, be a requirement to access content such as random groups? And what do you think? How important artifact power would become in pre-made groups? So there's kind of, I guess, two questions there. One relating to, is artifact power progression going to be like a requirement for like LFD, LFR, stuff like that? Like you must be this tall to ride sort of situation. But then also going into the pre-made group side of things.
Yeah, so we're not planning. Well, there are no intentions of requiring specific levels of artifact progression to do certain content. We still continue to have the eye level requirements for that content, and putting relics in your artifact influences your eye level, and going out and getting those relics naturally gets you the power to level the artifact. So things should play out pretty naturally in that sense. It's just eye level that we're looking at as requirements.
Okay.
As far as how important artifact power would become in pre-made groups, it's a little hard to predict kind of the social norms there. I'm sure some people will. I mean, the artifact power, it does make a big difference in your power, but because of the way we're doing those catch-up curves, we're not expecting there to be a wide divide in between players under most circumstances anyway. So some people might get really demanding about having specific progression. That's possible, but hopefully it doesn't actually play out that strongly.
Nice. And it's actually possibly worth noting, it's actually relatively difficult to even see what someone else's artifact is actually at, because it's not something that you can inspect very easily on other players, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's actually worth saying that, but when we talk about the eye level of the artifact and the relics you're putting in the artifact to increase it, that's actually going to have a larger influence on the damage you're doing through that weapon in a lot of cases than progression, unless we're talking like 0 to end.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, it's not. I don't believe it's possible to inspect other people and see their artifact progress.
So that'll help with the sort of the fear of a pre-made group saying, "Oh, you haven't unlocked all of your golds entirely just yet, so you're not invited to our group," sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Question from Volstars came from Twitter, who asked, is Atcherus going to be utilized better as a Death Knight base now, or will it still just be Runeforge and training dummies?
Atcherus, I can never decide.
Yeah, me either.
So Atcherus, it plays out very similarly to the other class. Well, I mean, I guess they all play out differently, but I mean, in that they have all the same kinds of systems acting in them, right? Like the Runeforge and the training dummies were the previous purposes that you saw through Acris, and maybe buying flying mounts once. But now you've got things like your artifact forge, your champions, and the mission table where you're sending them off into the world. You're kicking off your artifact quest lines there. There's a few other major quest lines that launch out of it, and that's going into the patches. We'll continue to see more content coming out of that location, as well as some major events that take place inside its doors. So it's going to have a much bigger role to play than it has over the course of the last few years.
Okay, cool. It's also possibly worth mentioning, I know we're starting to run out of time here, but I think it's possibly worth mentioning, a lot of times when we have an order hall that's a place that's already well established in the game, and like obviously Death Knights with Acaris is probably the most direct example, but it's a place that Death Knights has spent a lot of time in already. We don't want to mess with that too much and like go and say, hey, it's totally different now. Look at all these changes we've made, because a lot of people are going to look at that and go, you've ruined everything. What have you done?
Except when we nuke the Monk Order Hall, apparently.
Wow, spoilers.
I think Acaris is just it acted as such a great example of like physically what an order hall could be, that it felt like an awesome opportunity to like hold onto that for Death Knights. And yeah, we didn't really want to tear that. Like, there's so many things about that space that work so well that we didn't really want to entirely reinvent it.
Okay.
So we focused on adding on to it instead.
Cool. All right. Question here from Panda Nacho, who says, I'm really interested in how you went about and chose all the artifact weapons and or class halls for each class. Was it a difficult process?
So with 1 minute left,
the
most open-ended question on the list. I mean, there's probably dozens of stories about how we decided on each individual thing for this. For the order halls, a lot of identifying the order halls was looking towards what represents this class fantasy in the strongest way possible. What locations do they connect with really well? It was also about playing against the tension of faction differences in a lot of cases. What place can we bring this class that lets us get them on neutral ground that's comfortable, rather than in some of the really alliance and horde specific locations that would push each other apart.
Like you wouldn't put priests in the Stormwind Chapel necessarily.
Yeah, which I mean, it's a great iconic priest location, but like an orc walking into Stormwind Chapel just doesn't feel right?
Yeah.
So there were a lot of decisions that we went through in terms of identifying the order halls. So those were some of the major ones. For the artifact weapons, similarly, we were trying to land class fantasy, but a lot of what we were trying to achieve with weapons was something that stands out and feels unique, both from the other weapons, but also from weapons that class has had before. Something that we could tie a really strong history to. Quite often, if we didn't have a weapon that already had history that we recognized, we would attach it into a hero that you recognized, or a location you recognize, or a story you recognize somewhere along the way, so that it still had its roots in the world, in a place that had significance. I'm sure there's much more I could go on to here, but I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, we are pretty much out of time at this point. So thank you so much for coming by today.
Yeah.
We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks to everybody who submitted questions and everybody who tuned in as well. Be sure to tune in again next week. We're actually going to have Jeremy Fiesel on. Awesome. He's going to be talking a bit about world quests and also demon invasions and some of the sort of pre-expansion content that's coming up. So
I'm
that
excited,
should be that should be really, really cool. But again, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. We are out of time. I saw the Viking truck setting up earlier, so I kind of want to get over there, get myself a nice, I don't know, corn dog or something.
Too late. There's a line.
Probably, yeah. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been fun.
Yeah, awesome. See you guys later.